Hello and welcome back to the TEPI podcast. For those of you who are here for the first time, thanks for tuning in. On this podcast, you'll get to hear the stories of people who are involved in different roles at the various corners of peace building in Northeast Asia. The guests share about the work they're doing as peace builders and the journey they've traveled to get there. In the last episode, I got to talk with Moe Sasaki about her diverse background as a peace builder. Definitely be sure to go listen to that episode if you haven't already. In this episode, though, you'll be hearing from Ahn Eunkyung, who is a middle school English teacher in South Korea and a practitioner of restorative justice, or just RJ for short. Eunkyung has been in the classroom as a teacher for nearly 10 years now. During that time, she took a short break to attend graduate school at the Center for Justice and Peace Building in order to develop tools to better equip herself to deal with the conflicts that she found in her classroom. In this conversation, she shares about that journey and how she navigates conflict and trauma as a teacher. So without further delay, here is Ahn Eunkyung. Eunkyung, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Austin.
So for those who maybe don't know who you are, can you give a little introduction about yourself and the work that you're doing?
I'm a member of Peace Momo, and I'm an educator. I've been teaching English at a private secondary school for about 14 years, I believe. And I'm also an RJ practitioner, and I mainly do circle process. Yeah, including conflicts, to deal with conflicts or build the relationship in the community.
I see. So you have a lot of different things that you're doing, lots of different roles. You had mentioned you're an RJ practitioner. Can you explain a little bit about what RJ is? Because maybe people have heard the term or kind of have an idea, but some people maybe also don't know what RJ is.
For me, RJ is a compass to find what justice is like.
I like that analogy. It's a very good analogy.
Yeah, so many people say that RJ is not a map, but a compass. So what is a compass for? For me, it's a compass for finding real justice. For me, is is a right relationship between one and the other. So RJ helped me find what real justice is like. And it's my compass. It's not an absolute compass. RJ is my personal way to follow the justice that I believe, the right relationship with myself, others, and spiritual thing, and all creatures.
It's a compass towards the right relationship.
Yeah, the core beliefs of RJ was all human beings are worthy, responsible, and we are all deeply interconnected. So when harms happen, it focuses on relationship, accountability, community, and empowerment. So one is harmed, which it means that all is harmed. So it echoed me so much when the home was broken because of the relationship conflict.
I'm sure we'll dive in a little bit deeper later in our conversation, but I'm curious, how did you first encounter RJ, or where did you first meet restorative justice?
It was 2012. It was very transformative moment in my life as a teacher, first of all, and it also affects my personal life as a human being. There was a 1 year long bullying in my homeroom. At the time, I was young, passionate homeroom teacher, and I believe that I was ready to build an amazing homeroom community with my students, and they were 7s. And at the beginning of this school year to the end, the community suffer a lot from relationship issues. At the time, I realized that I was not ready to deal with this conflicts and violence as a teacher and as one and only adult in the Hongmen community. And I acknowledged that I never learned and trained about how to transform this crisis into educational way. And at the time, school bullying became societal issue in Korea. So the community, teachers community I was in called Good Teachers started to learn and practice RJ in school violence. So I asked to the community, oh, please help me. I had this issue, but I don't know what to do. And RJ was there.
Wow. It seems like it would take a lot of kind of wisdom and self-reflection to realize as a young teacher that I don't have the skills I need to deal with this bullying or this class conflict. And like you were mentioning, RJ is a compass, and realizing that you're lost in the classroom. That seems like it was a very kind of wise thing for you to do. Now that you have RJ experience and have been trained as an RJ practitioner, how do you approach those types of situations? How do you implement the RJ in your classroom with your students?
I'm a homeroom teacher and English teacher, and one of my role and RJ practitioners in my school. So I think my main roles, main ways to implement RJ have three parts. First is creating just and respectful learning environment. Yeah, so for example, as a homeroom teacher, I do love to create a space, every voice is valued, every voice is heard. And second is building a relationship, building a healthy relationships. And I use a lot of dialogues in my English class. So I create a space where students can share their thoughts and feelings in English class. And also, and third thing is dealing with conflicts in peaceful way and transforming harms. So for that, I think in English class, I teach trauma because many conflicts related to trauma. So I teach trauma and how to understand it and how to heal from it. And when conflicts is seen in the parts we are reading and we are studying, and I teach and share conflict resolution skills or conflict transformation skills. And I'm a RJ practitioner, kind of facilitator, circle facilitator at school. So when harms or when relationship conflict happen, students and teachers can be invited to restorative circles where we share our needs and how we feel because of the harms, something like that. So I suggest the school to create that space people can talk about themselves when harms happen. So these are three ways I implement in my job as other RJ rooted teachers do at their schools.
You mentioned trauma, that you talk with your students about trauma. I'm curious, what do you see as the connection between trauma and restorative justice? Or what is the importance of trauma in trying to heal these harms or to use our compass to move towards justice? What is the role of learning about or being informed about trauma?
I think not all, not most, but some conflicts related to trauma. For example, three girls I had in my homeroom 7 years ago had relationship issues. Over 1 year, they came to conflict circles and restorative circles. I really appreciate they chose to do circles when they had conflicts. Even though they did circles together, the conflicts happened over and over for 1 year. And the student who caused harm became the one who was harmed, vice versa.
I see. Yeah.
So hurt people.
Yeah.
So I think that was a kind of aha moment for me. Oh, trauma works in their relationship.
When you say that hurt people, that original hurt can kind of be the trauma or the source of all this other problem. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah. So they hurt one friend because they didn't want to be bullied. So the way to avoid bullying is to bully another. And they got this trauma before middle school. In elementary school, they survive from that kind of bullying, even if they are not affected. I mean, they are not involved directly. People around them also traumatized by bullying. So they are already traumatized in the structural and cultural level. So this structural, cultural trauma, I mean bullying trauma in elementary school, in childhood, affect how they acted in middle school.
You mentioned the kind of structural and cultural trauma that these students are caught in. I know a little bit about in the US, RJ emerged as a response to the criminal justice system and its failures to provide justice for incarcerated peoples. But I'm curious, what, in your opinion, is the harm or the needs that RJ is meeting in Korean society? You mentioned these kind of cultural, structural levels. I'm curious if you could share about that a little bit more.
I think, yeah, it's a great question. I think RJ encompasses needs and harms at every level in society, like relational issues and most conflicts, even if it's relationship conflict, structural and cultural and self-systemic violence affects it. From my own experience, the community I was working with, I am working with, made RJ dialogue after Sewol ferry disaster happened. We opened the space for people to come to talk about what happened, what harms happened, and what needs we have. And what can we do to prevent these tragic events, something like that. So it was time for mourning. It was time for kind of reflection. And it's a time for seeking for justice. And it was a time for what we can do to make a change.
Well, that sounds very like a very useful practice, especially for an event like Sewol, where there's so much trauma it's kind of inflicted upon people. Kind of mentioning about trauma and events that can be very dark or very painful. Like yourself as a practitioner who is talking with students or parents or maybe other teachers about these types of things, I feel like that could be really hard to listen to or to be a part of continuously. So as an RJ practitioner or circle keeper, how do you take care of yourself and kind of protect from secondary trauma?
Yeah, it's a great question. Yeah, I think self-care is a part of my life. I love journaling and gardening and talking, yeah, with people I trust. And also, I'm trying to do a lot of body work. I believe that body keeps the scores.
What's body work?
It's kind of mindfulness
I
and
see.
yoga um, and walking. And it's so helpful for me to relax and release the energy I didn't notice. So it could sink in my body.
Mhm.
So even if I don't notice it, I just do some releasing body work. And arts is also a good way to discover what I experience, even though I'm not aware of it. And art is also leads me to find resilience inside of me. So that's what I do for self-care.
You mentioned the word resilience.
Mhm.
I've heard the term resilience used in conversations about RJ or about trauma. You were talking about how art can help you build resilience. I'm wondering if you
Mhm.
could talk about that a little bit more, because
Mm.
at the beginning of our conversation, you mentioned how, as a new teacher, it was overwhelming to try to be the only adult in the room dealing
Mhm.
with all of the students. And now, as an RJ practitioner and a teacher and a circle keeper, you have kind of built up this resilience. But maybe for people who are still those new teachers in the classroom, or people who are still trying to figure out how to navigate these
Mm.
these hard situations, how maybe what are some ways to build resilience, or if you were to give advice to yourself back when you were a new teacher, what would you say?
That's a great question. That's a great question. I'd love to say to a younger teacher, I mean, me, say to myself, wow, about 10 years ago, you have everything in you and you are strong enough. You are resilient enough. This is the thing that makes you stronger, healthier, and more resilient. And also, you have sisters and brothers to work with in hopes, and you are good enough to the students you have in your homeroom. That's what I want to say, yeah, to myself in 2012.
I hope that's also useful to some of the listeners who are maybe in similar situations as you were in 2012. Is there anything about your work or the stuff that you're doing these days that I didn't ask about that you think would be good to share?
I just finished the Zoom workshop about how to teach RJ with games and activities.
That sounds fun.
Yeah, it's so fun. Do you have the little book of restorative teaching tools? It's a kind of new book from, yeah, 대장간. Do you have it?
I don't think I have it.
It's a kind of very interactive and activity focused book, and I translated. It's my third book to translate into Korean, and I'd love to support the publisher called 대장간, which has been publishing books on peace building and justice. And the book focuses on theories and practices rooted in idea about how to teach RJ based on what we value. So it's for me, it was this amazing book.
I'll be sure to put a link
Mm.
for the translation of the book in the podcast description, so anybody who's interested in checking it out can go look at it.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Well, Eunkyung, thank you for coming on the podcast and sharing your story. It's been a pleasure to get to hear about your journey, learning about RJ and growing as a teacher. So I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
So that was Ahn Eunkyung. Hopefully you found her insights useful and her story inspiring. If you would like to check out the book, The Little Book of Restorative Teaching Tools that Eunkyung translated into Korean, you can find the link in the podcast description. Or you can search online for The Little Book of Restorative Teaching Tools to find an English copy. Also, if this conversation piqued your interest and you'd like to learn a bit more about topics such as trauma, conflict transformation, or circle process, I'd recommend checking out some of the other books in the Little Book series. If you'd like to learn more about the work we do at the Trans Education for Peace Institute, you can visit momotepi.org or find us on Facebook. That's all I have for you today. As always, thank you for taking the time to listen in on this conversation. I hope it offers you something you can carry with you back into the context you find yourself in, wherever that may be. I'll talk to you in the next episode with another guest sharing about the ways they're working and learning towards peace in Northeast Asia.